Every time you eat a handful of almonds, you are surviving a lethal dose of cyanide. Because 12,000 years ago, standing in a dark forest, your ancestors had to make a choice. In front of you is a cluster of dark purple berries, glossy and sweet-looking, hanging low on a bush. Your stomach hurts. Your children haven't eaten in 2 days. You have about 10 seconds to make a decision that will either feed your family or kill everyone who eats with you tonight. This wasn't a rare moment. This was Tuesday. For roughly 300,000 years, before nutrition labels, before nightly news warnings, before a single written word existed, your ancestors had to figure out, plant by plant, berry by berry, root by root, what was food and what was death. And somehow they got it right often enough that you're here to hear about it. The story starts long before agriculture, long before villages, back when humans were small, mobile bands moving through landscapes packed with plants that wanted nothing to do with being eaten. Here's the thing about plants. They can't run. They can't bite. So evolution gave them chemistry instead. Alkaloids, cyanogenic glycosides, cardiac glycosides. Compounds that cause seizures, paralyze hearts, or shut down kidneys within hours. Foxglove alone contains digoxin, a compound that can stop a human heart in a dose smaller than a grain of rice. Ancient humans didn't know the word alkaloid, but they learned its consequences the hard way. So how did they survive it? Not through luck, through a system. Anthropologist Timothy Johns, in his 1990 fieldwork with the Aymara people of the Andes, documented something remarkable. A multi-step detoxification process for wild potato species so bitter and toxic they'd cause vomiting raw. The Aymara learned to freeze dry the tubers, soak them in running water for days, then dip them in clay-rich mud before eating. The clay binds to the toxic glycoalkaloids and carries them out of the digestive system. That's not a folk tradition. That's applied biochemistry, refined over roughly 8,000 years, passed down without a single textbook. That's not speculation. That's a documented technique still practiced today called chunyo production, and it's one of the oldest continuously used food processing methods on Earth. But here's what's wild about that. This kind of knowledge wasn't guesswork. It was trial, catastrophic error, and transmission. Anthropologist Nina Etkin's research on ethnobotany across multiple hunter-gatherer societies found a consistent pattern. Small experimental tastes, tiny amounts, held in the mouth, sometimes spat out based on bitterness alone. Bitterness itself became a built-in alarm system. Humans, like most mammals, are born with a genetic sensitivity to bitter compounds, because bitterness correlates strongly with toxicity across plant families. Your instinctive dislike of bitter foods as a child wasn't pickiness. It was 60 million years of primate evolution warning you. Think about that the next time you force down a vegetable you don't like. That reflex on your tongue is a fossil, a survival tool passed down from ancestors who used it to stay alive. And here's what's disturbing about that early trial and error system. It had a body count. Archaeologist Kristen, studying the Hadza people of Tanzania in fieldwork published through the 1990s, noted that certain plant knowledge among hunter-gatherer groups was gendered. Older women, past reproductive age, often took on the role of testing new or uncertain food sources, because losing an experienced elder was, in brutal evolutionary terms, less costly to group survival than losing someone of reproductive age. This is sometimes called the grandmother hypothesis, first formally proposed by Hawkes in 1998, and it doesn't just explain menopause. It may explain who volunteered, or was expected to volunteer, to taste the unknown root first. That's the twist most people don't expect. The safety testing that keeps a species alive for 300,000 years wasn't random. It was, in some documented cases, systematically assigned to the people the group could least afford to lose from active hunting and reproduction, and most afford to lose if something went wrong. Now here's the disturbing part taken further. Toxicologist and anthropologist Nathaniel Dominy has argued that this knowledge transfer had to happen fast enough and be remembered precisely enough that it likely helped drive the evolution of human long-term memory and oral storytelling itself. A single misremembered detail, wrong soil, wrong season, wrong preparation time, could kill an entire family group in one meal. Stories, myths, and taboos around specific plants weren't superstition for its own sake. They were compressed data wrapped in memorable narratives so a piece of survival information could travel intact across 20 generations without ever being written down. So here's the full picture. Every plant taboo your ancestors passed down, every "don't eat the red ones" warning wrapped in a folk story about a trickster spirit, was a piece of hard-won toxicology encoded not in a lab notebook but in a bedtime story. That's not the crop version of trial and error. That's the ancient equivalent of running 10,000 unregulated clinical trials with no consent forms, no control groups, and a fatality rate we can only guess at from the archaeological record, and somehow distilling the results into a story simple enough for a child to remember and repeat. Archaeobotanist Dorian Fuller's analysis of plant remains at sites across the Fertile Crescent, dated to around 10,000 BCE, found something telling. The wild ancestors of modern staple crops like lentils, chickpeas, and wild wheat contained far higher levels of toxic compounds than their domesticated descendants. Early farmers weren't just selecting for bigger seeds. Generation after generation, without understanding genetics at all, they were unknowingly breeding the poison out of their own food supply, plant by plant, harvest by harvest. That's the story hiding underneath your dinner. Every almond you eat today is sweet because ancient farmers over thousands of years selected against a single recessive gene that once made wild almonds bitter and cyanide-laced enough to be lethal in a handful. Botanist and food historian Jared Diamond has noted that this single genetic shift, sweet almonds versus bitter almonds, may represent one of the oldest deliberate selections in human agricultural history, occurring independently in multiple regions. Now, think back to that forest, 12,000 years ago, standing in front of that unfamiliar berry bush. You don't know it, but the decision you're about to make, taste a tiny piece, wait, watch, remember, is the exact same decision that eventually gave the world seedless grapes, sweet almonds, and seed catalogs with nutrition labels on the back. You never made that decision alone either. Somewhere behind you, someone already tasted something similar. Somewhere ahead of you, your children will inherit whatever you decide tonight, wrapped in a story they'll tell their own children long after they've forgotten your face. So today, when you walk past a grocery store aisle without a second thought about whether the almonds might kill you, remember what that convenience actually cost. 10,000 years of careful, brutal, generational trial and error compressed into a single walk down a well-lit aisle. Every apple you eat without fear, every potato you boil without soaking it in clay mud first, every almond in your trail mix. Somebody a very long time ago took a small bite first so you wouldn't have to.